Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to round 6 of season 6 of the Acelith Design Endurance Championship for 2020. I'm your host, Paul Walsh, also known as TX141 or Britain a Spit, and we have got a rather fast and furious race up for grabs today. The track, Red Bull Ring Short in Austria, and the time of day, fine weather, 7:45 in the morning. Cars, we've got Group 4s, the touring car class if you will, and we've got plenty of Tier 1 drivers here wanting to pick up a fantastic result as we start to move closer and closer to the final races of the last season of 2020. The way you can feel the anticipation from our drivers right now. And hopefully we're not going to experience any camera issues, and I think unfortunately we are going to experience some camera issues. Which if so, that's going to be very unfortunate, but we will wait and find out. Our first driver who's going to be out on track will be Gadget334. No, and we're not going to get any camera issues, so this is absolutely great news. And our lead driver then will be Gadget334, who we are going to ride on board with shortly as he completes his first qualifying lap, and we'll take you through the lap effectively. Now, in terms of the drivers I would personally watch out for here, I don't really have a driver as such at the moment. Let's see how the qualifying times play out, and then we'll start to consider it. As Gadget's coming out of turn 4 and now up into 5, and we're going to switch to the onboard camera to give you that feel of exactly what is going on. Now, keep in mind, of course, the McLaren has 7 gears, so his upshifts are going to be a little bit more frequent and faster than other cars racing today. So coming out of turn 6, you want to get as wide a run as possible, perhaps a little bit wider, then use the exit curve as much as you can. But Gadget here, you can see, building up speed now to commence the lap. So he's going to start making his way over to the left-hand side shortly. Well, he's going to try and use that curve in order to rotate the car in. Coming down to 4th gear and then 3rd gear, drifting the car in. Could have perhaps taken a bit more of a smoother apex there to hit approximately an apex speed of 72 miles an hour. Now coming up to turn 2, braking before the marshal's post on the left-hand side. Coming down to 3rd gear, getting as tight as possible. So you want to be over to the right out of 2 into 3. And you can see he snaps the car over to the left here, and he's going to immediately get on the power as soon as he feels the nose of the car bite in. Could have been a bit more aggressive on the power there, but it's confidence as well. And you can imagine as he does more and more laps, he'll get more confident and start to build up that pace. Now coming down into 5, braking just before the 50 board, into 5th gear, 1 downshift, 2 downshift in fact to 4th, and now using the full width of the circuit where possible before using the yellow bumps on the left hand side of the curb, the runoff strips there, in order to know where to brake for the final corner, and now just straight lining it to the start finish line to complete the lap in what is a 52.1. So a good starting lap by the McLaren driver, but you can see already that some drivers are improving, with Mr. Sean picking up a 51.8, and we just look further afield, Berkey Baby coming across the line now and has completed a 57.9, so he's had a bit of a disastrous lap. And more drivers coming through here. Plucks the Duck currently sitting on a provisional par of a 51.6, but all of our laps are still coming in. As we look around the field here, and we can see that Flapjack has come across. Any other drivers to come through? We've got G-Rabbit, so what is he going to do in the Ferrari here? Looking as though it's going to be a 52, a 52.0 flat almost. So after 1 lap, but we've got plenty of laps to go in qualifying because of the fact this is a 15-minute session and the laps are sub 1 minute. You've got Plucks the Duck currently sitting in pole with what is a 51.6, and Jack very close behind, only 5 thousandths behind with a 51.633. So it's going to be very close, and oddly enough we have seen 2 drivers here running mid-engine rear-wheel drive cars getting the better of the field so far, when we perhaps expect the front-engine front-wheel drive cars to be the fastest over a single lap. As more laps come in, and Jack improves to a 51.5, Berkey improves to a 51.8, and you can see how our drivers now are forming up little trains, slipstream trains, and this can be important for drivers to gain a couple of tenths of lap time because of the fact if they run in a slipstream train and know to anticipate the effect of that dirty air and pulling the car along, but in terms of the aerodynamic drag as they go into the corners and the fact that takes away some of their stability, as Jack and Bottlejob here are trying to fight for track position in preparation for the next round of qualifying. Jack probably thinking that Bottlejob needs to get out of the way because he's picked up that half-second penalty, and Bottlejob probably thinking Jack needs to back off because he needs to serve that penalty. And you can see already things are kicking off, but they need to sort it out with the stewards and offline rather than in race trim. It's not appropriate to do it here, gentlemen. Take it to the stewards afterwards if you feel there's been a problem. But you can see already that our drivers are trying to form those little trains, and by doing so, as Plucks comes around with a half-second penalty on his board, the idea is effectively that by running in these slipstream trains, they will gain that lap time, and they will have practice running in that slipstream to know it's not going to cost them too much time in the corners. But penalties are also being accrued, and that's the thing as well. Our drivers are going to be trying to use the maximum of the track limits. And to give you an idea as we ride on board with Plucks in terms of what you can expect on the track limit side, so turn 2, this is a standard corner. In fact, Plucks has got it very wrong there, and in fact backed all the way off of it. So we're going to switch over to another driver here. And that's Gadget. We'll just switch to another driver because we've shown Gadget a little bit much so far. We will find ourselves a copy of Mr. Sean. There we go. Mr. Sean coming into the pits, unfortunately for us. So we've got G-Rabbit in the Ferrari coming through. So let's ride on board with G-Rabbit, as I think he's probably going to be pitting in the near future because he's already got a little bit of graining on that front left tyre. But what you can see here, as we switch to the onboard camera, is that in terms of track limits, so you always want to keep two wheels on the inside of the track surface. The track surface includes the red and white curbs, if you will. So if you put all four wheels beyond those curbs, you are going to see yourself pick up a half-second penalty. And you can see that he runs two wheels beyond it, but two on the inside. The same with this corner, and the same with the exit of turn 6, and the fact that he's using the full width there, but not going beyond those red and white curbs in terms of all four wheels to complete a lap. It's the same with turn 1, albeit you can use the green rumble strip on the left-hand side, but that can pull the car off circuit. But coming into this corner using the full whip and drifting in there. And in terms of turn 1, you can see that yellow bump strip effectively. Now that's been put there recently over the last couple of years at Red Bull Ring. The idea being that it's a raised curb which is used to trap low ride height cars, particularly say F1 cars or GT2 cars for example. That's to stop them running too wide because the bottom of the car will bottom out because of low ride height, and that will cause the car to go off and do damage to the floor panel of the car. Fortunately for us in our Group 4 cars here today, we're not going to see any bottoming out hopefully, because these cars are quite high given the fact that they're road cars compared to what could be. But I say that, then again, a Ferrari 458 Italia is very low to the ground surface. If you've sat in one in real life, you'll know what I mean. But if not, look one up and you'll see just how low to the ground it is. And also the Porsche Cayman, for example, if it's running the full sport suspension, can have a ride height of approximately 140 millimeters off the ground. As Muller CJ improves to a 52.1, Jaganat has not improved recently, but Muller right now leading a little bit of a charge in terms of lap time. But with almost half the qualifying session complete so far, we can see that it's Zefix's Jack currently sitting on pole with a 51.5, and then Plux the Duck almost a 10th down on a 51.6. We then got Berkey Baby, who is on a 51.8, separated only 200 between him and Mr. Sean. And on top of that, then we've got almost a 10th down to Jaganat, the Dodge Viper driver, who is on a 51.9. And those are the top 5. They are all within the 51s. And then our first 52 driver is G-Rabbit, with his initial qualifying lap being recorded there and still standing as his fastest lap. That's 52.031. And then we've got Gadget close behind again as Senna improves to a 52.4, which I think is going to move him a little bit closer to the top 10 here, but not necessarily too far, as Muller CJ improves there to a 52.0. Now that is a very strong lap there, and that puts Muller right on the door of those 51s, if you will. Only 9 thousandths outside of the 51s there, and Muller's going to be proud of himself for that one and thinking he can get a little bit more. We've got Bottlejob currently sitting in P10, only a 10th down on Flapjack, who's currently sitting in P9. Bottlejob running almost beyond the track limits. They're just keeping it in, I believe, with the front right wheel in particular staying on the inside of the curb surfaces. But that was a very strong run out the final corner, and unfortunately it's not reflected in a faster lap, so perhaps he lost a bit too much time through the running wide and had to lift out of it. But the last of our drivers so far in terms of laps is Ayrton Senna with that 52.4, but from pole to last at the moment it's only 1 second in total, and that means you can expect that over the course of this race it is going to be more about our drivers trying to stay with one another and use one another's slipstream to an advantage rather than trying to outpace one over a long distance. There will be groups to be said who break away, as Flapjack now improves to what is a 52.099, so that moves him up to provisional P8 at this point. Very good lap by Flapjack given the Ferrari's overall strengths, and he's narrowing the gap between himself and the other Ferrari driver, G-Rabbit, as Jack improves to a 51.4. So more and more lap time is coming in at this point, but you can imagine that Plux is probably thinking to himself right now, I don't need to be on pole in order to win this race, I just need to be on that front row alongside Jack. And that's what a number of our drivers may look for here. And another example will be Berkey Baby. Now do keep in mind one thing. If Berkey Baby qualifies where he is right now in P3, he's on that second row, but the Corvette has such strong launch control. If he nails his reaction time, that Corvette could jump into the lead going into the first corner if he gets it right, as he drifts into turn 5. That is quite the drift there by Berkey Baby, and I don't think as he cuts across turn 6, that is definitely going to be at least a second penalty in the fact he's also run right out the exit of turn 6. You have to imagine that, yep, 1 second penalty, he's immediately burned it because he knows deep down the fact that that is not going to stand as a lap with the stewards. The stewards will be raging about that one if that was to stand. Well, with Berkey Baby, he's probably done enough now to give himself a good start in this race. And a number of our drivers will do that because they will know that really to get on pole here It's important to be towards the front, but is it important to be the pole sitter? Not necessarily. And Jagannat here, he'll probably be trying to get himself into that P4 to be on the second row, because he'll want to be right behind the potential action that could kick off on the front row of the grid because of how tight it is between Plux and Jack. And they both want it hard, and all of our drivers want it hard, of course, but none more so than Jack, I think, because he really wants to prove himself to the Tier 1 guys if he hasn't already. In his mind, he's a very competitive young driver, but you have to feel for Jack and the fact that he really wants to make his mark, as indeed all of our drivers who've been promoted do, whether it's G-Rabbit or Bottle Job. As Jagannat picks up a penalty and jumps to the pits. And speaking of G-Rabbit, he's coming around to complete another lap with just over 5 minutes of the qualifying session to go. Let's see if G-Rabbit improves. And it doesn't look like there's improvement, but we're going to switch to the onboard here, because what you can imagine with G-Rabbit at this point is him being in the slipstream of Plux the Duck, or at least a little bit of slipstream as he jumps down to second gear. He might be able to improve here, so let's just walk through the lap with him. So coming up to turn 2 now, he's going to be braking out of fourth gear into third gear shortly. And you can see how he's been affected by that dirty air, in fact, as he broke his standard line. Probably when he wasn't in dirty air, that would be his standard braking point. But the dirty air has carried the car far too forward into the braking zone. And one thing you might notice with certain drivers, and you'll see this in the race if we jump to the onboard telemetry, is that some drivers may lift about 25 to 50 metres before their standard braking point when running behind another car. And that just helps cut a little bit of speed out of the car, because it's essentially an offset between the slipstream benefit and the fact you're lifting off to do a little bit of early braking before you actually do any braking with the car. But coming out the final corner then to complete the lap, I don't think this is going to be an improvement from the Ferrari driver. So it stands currently that he's in P7. And looking further afield, we've got a number of drivers in the pits at the moment, and some of our drivers here as well, you have to keep in mind, as Senna stays well out of the way. He seems to have got it very wrong coming out of turn number 1. Let's see if we can catch what happened here. So Senna was coming up to the corner. Now, does he just get it wrong on the power into the corner at the apex? Indeed, yep, it's a snap oversteer. That's what I was talking about earlier. He got impacted by the fact that as the car started to rotate beyond the centre point of the corner, the apex of the corner, the rear end started to jut out, and as he got on the power there, the rear end was not stabilised, something that the Toyota has this weird knack for. If the car's not fully stable, then the rear end just decides to have a world of its own, and he just simply saw the car weave out from underneath him, and he went off to the inside of the circuit, to the right-hand side of the circuit. Unfortunate for Senna, but what you can imagine is he is going to, if he doesn't qualify any further up, he will still have a good fighting chance in the race, given that he does have a very good race pace, or typically does in the fight for the midfield. As Berkey's coming around a lap on turn 2 right now, and you can see again he's trying to keep it as tight as possible, and then swinging over to the right initially before cutting back to the left for that turn 3, and then he's going to cut as much as possible into turn 4 there. He's got to be careful to keep all 4 wheels outside. And 2 of the 4 wheels, I should say, on the inside of the track surface, as I say, the red and white curb denoting the track limits, if you will, because if he goes beyond there, you can pick up to a second penalty just by simply cutting a little bit of turn 4, and that can be a nightmare as he gets it right on the limits there. I don't think that's going to be a penalty for Berkey. That is the ultimate extension of the limit coming through the final corner there, and he doesn't improve. But really here, with only 3 minutes to go, you do have to wonder who is going to improve now, because of the simple fact that I think it's too close to call for our drivers in terms of closing up any more places, and a lot of our drivers, if they haven't improved so far, as I mark my words, Muller CJ is now improved and gone into the 51.9s, and actually I should point out that Jagannat has improved off camera to a 51.9 as well. Muller only being just shy of half a tenth down on him, half a second. Goodness me, that's inappropriate to call it that way. But Muller improving, and we do have to wonder whether the Dodge Viper driver has got a little bit more just to eke him closer to the second row of the grid, albeit I think at this point Jagannat will just take that P5 in terms of qualifying and roll with it, as he picks up a half-second penalty there for running wide out of turn 1, and he's going to back out of it immediately and let Senna jump through. As Senna comes through turn 2 here, we're going to get that nice camera shot, and look how tight to the apex Senna is. And again here for turn 3, and you can see that Toyota, whilst it's front engine rear wheel drive, it has so much rotation on that rear axle by comparison with other front engine rear wheel drive cars, and Senna really showing you how it's done there in terms of getting the perfect flowing line through turns 2 and 3. May not be the fastest driver in qualifying, but you've got to comment on the fact that was a very smooth run, as he gets a really good run out of turn 5. Now, will he nail it coming into the final corner here? He's just got to keep it in the limits. He's done that very well. Will Senna improve from his current lap as he comes across? And it is an improvement to a 52.0. Well, Senna, that is a nice improvement, putting him right bang in the midfield. And I think now he's going to be smiling about that one and thinking, I'm no longer the last guy out on the circuit. I'm going to show you all that. It's a great lap by Senna there, showing that the little 86 has got life in it yet. As we switch over to Flapjack now, so the 2 of our Ferrari drivers, number 2 of our Ferrari drivers at the moment, I should point out, then being split by Senna's improved lap. We wonder if Flapjack's going to respond here in his own Ferrari. as he comes out the final corner then to complete the lap. And some of our drivers now will be coming into the pits to switch tyres before we get the race underway, of under a minute to go. And you can see already that some of our drivers have put on softs, for example. I'm probably suspecting the fact that if they go for the softs, it'll be the more durable tyre, albeit not as fast. But the deficit in terms of lap time here is approximately half a second between the super soft and the soft, as we seem to have a little bit of an incident going on behind at the moment between Gadget and Plux. Not sure what's going on there, whether there's a little bit of weaving or not, but Plux probably thinks he's on a very fast lap and wants Gadget to get out of the way. Alternatively, he's just running too close to the rear Gadget, as Mr. Sean improves to a 51.7 on his penultimate lap. That is a very nice improvement by Sean, knocking Berkey Baby off of P3 and into P4 at the moment. Now, will Berkey Baby respond? That is the question. And in fact, Berkey Baby has triggered a yellow flag at turn 2. He will not be improving. So that is the end of Berkey Baby's qualifying. Now, will Jagannath be able to essentially outmatch Berkey Baby's lap and get onto that second row? That will be an important question, because if Jagannath can, then Berkey's straight line speed off the launch at the start of this race may be compromised, because he's got 2 rows to deal with. As Muller CJ improves to a 51.9 but does not surpass Jagannath, the gap between them now being 0.04 of a second. And as we see Jagannath coming around the corner then, nobody else has improved so far. We've got Senna coming across the line as well. And does Senna improve? No, he does not. Does Jagannath improve? He does not. And we've got some more drivers coming through at the moment. And just wait and see who else is coming through. We've got Sean coming through. He does not improve either. And I think we've got 2 drivers sat in the pits at the moment, but nobody else has improved. So that is the end of qualifying, ladies and gentlemen. Now watch to your right, of course, that's where you'll see Jack, and on the left hand side you'll see Plux. Plux will have the inside line into turn 1, but again, watch out for that purple, not McLaren, Chevrolet behind them in the form of Berkey, because it could be very fast on the launch. And it's lights out and away they go, and it looks like our drivers all a little bit delayed, but the one who got a very good launch there was Jagannath in P5 in the Dodge. And you can see, look already how Berkey Baby's up into P2 as he's looking towards the outside of Jack into turn 1. All of our drivers charging through turn 1 here, and it's going to be a little bit of chaos as they come out the corner, but everybody seems to have got through relatively fine so far. There might be some track limit penalties coming in, but we can't see anything so far. But up front, Jack is leading with Berkey Baby behind, and we can see as they all come out of turn 2 and into 3 that we've got side by side between Flatjack and G-Rabbit here. The 2 Ferrari drivers are already having a war of the road against one another, and Gadget is behind them both, so the one who's really lost out here does seem to be Gadget and Muller CJ a little bit. Both of those drivers falling back, and as they come around to turn 5 and then into 6, we've got what would be Bryce coming up on the inside of turn 5, and then as they come out of the final corner to complete lap number 1, it looks as though we went wide a bit there. We've got some track limit penalties coming up. It is Zefix's Jack leading from Berkey Baby, leading from Plux the Duck, followed by Jagannath, followed by Mr. Sean, followed by Flapjack 247, followed by G-Rabbit, Gadget 334, and then we've got DJ Rice, Muller CJ, Ayrton Senna and Sir Bottlejob making up the rear of the field as they're all getting a little bit feisty behind. But really the key thing that's going on right now as we look further back, as we see penalties being applied to our drivers, we've got Flapjack and G-Rabbit still going side by side, and I think Flapjack went a bit wide out of turn 1 there. Now, was that because he was giving space to G-Rabbit or not? We have to double check that, and we can see even further back right now, we've got side by side out of 2 and into 3 between Bottlejob and Senna, with Senna holding on to that leading line right now, but you can see his line was compromised, and as a result Bottlejob is going to get that 11th place. Now meanwhile we can look back and we can see that Gadget is past Flapjack, so Flapjack has had to take some time penalties there in his battle with G-Rabbit as Rice goes wide out of 5, and that is going to be at least a half-second penalty as he goes even wider out of the final corner, and that is going to be disastrous in terms of his time at the moment. That's going to be a number of penalties accrued, a 1-second penalty applied as Muller CJ now is going on the inside. Bottlejob's picked up a half-second penalty as well. Penalties everywhere, ladies and gentlemen, goodness me. It's not football, unfortunately, it is racing, and you can see that as a result Muller CJ now up into P9, but he will have to serve that half-second penalty. Now further up front, meanwhile, I should point out that G-Rabbit has just got the lunge on the inside of Mr. Sean going into turn 2. Quite a late move there under braking, and as they come through 3 and up into 4, you can see that Sean is right out the backside of the Ferrari driver here, and I think he's going to want a little bit of a comeback as he's charging up towards turn 5. Now will he go for the lunge on the inside? Because he will have that grip, and he's going to go for it. He's on the inside. And the 666 car has made it, and he's been able to keep it in the limits. But will G-Rabbit return the favour into 6? It wouldn't be wise to do so, simply because it's a much tighter apex into 6. It's not as forgiving for our drivers, and that completes another lap as they now move on to lap number 4. And Sean has regained the place, and Gadget, meanwhile, is all over the back of the Ferrari driver as Gadget moves to the inside and G-Rabbit goes to the outside. And it looks as though G-Rabbit's just decided to let Gadget through initially, but now they're side by side into 2. Will Gadget be able to hold that inside line under braking? I reckon he will, although G-Rabbit is going later on the brakes and going round effectively, and Gadget has decided not to contest it at this point. And further back, you can see that Flapjack is now chasing this group, and Muller CJ separating him and Sir Bottlejob, with Bottlejob all over the back of the pair of them. And right at the back right now is Rice 83, who I believe would have had to take those penalties, and Senna is chasing after this pack. Now up front, meanwhile, we can see that Plux the Duck has been able to get past Jaggernaut and is back in the chase as Berkey Baby's fallen away as well after serving his time penalties. So the order has been reset, and the one who's gained the most after the opening 4 laps will be Jaggernaut. But penalties are still being applied to our drivers here as they're coming around to start lap number 5. And just keep an eye on the front right now. The gap hasn't opened up too much, although we are starting to see some gaps form. As looking further back here, we're not seeing any side-by-side into turn 1 at this point in the race, but at the same time you can see how there's a little group of cars just forming up, and this is that train that has to work together, and G-Rabbit is the head of that train from Finland in the Ferrari, and they're all trying to chase after Mr. Sean in P5, who has cleared some space between himself and G-Rabbit, the gap between the two of them now being 1.5 seconds. And Gadget is still hounding the back of G-Rabbit's car, and you do have to wonder whether Gadget is going to go for a move here, because surely some frustration is building up, and he's gone to the inside into turn 5, and I think this is going to work out well for him, because whilst G-Rabbit is quite late on the brakes and confident in the grip of that Ferrari, I think Gadget will be thinking to himself, look, just give me the space and now I can go chase after Sean. And G-Rabbit is a sensible driver. He'll know when he should be fighting and when he should be backing off, and I think these two are going to work together to chase after Sean now. What if the McLaren of Gadget having the stronger legs on the straights? And behind these two you can see that Flapjack and Muller CJ are still fighting non-stop over that P8 position at the moment. Flapjack having got himself back up into P8 and trying to break away from Muller effectively as Bottlejob's chasing after them, and our gentleman at the rear right now would happen to be DJ Rice. But again, Rice is only 2.5 seconds down on these guys, and he will close up as time moves on. Up towards the front still, it's Zephyx's Jack, who's currently running away with 2.7 seconds over Plux the Dark. But remember, all of our drivers here have got time penalties accrued to their cars, and this is something they will have to consider as they go deeper and deeper into the race. And the one driver right now will probably be thinking to himself he's grateful for not having any penalties will be Mr. Sean, and also the drivers behind him. And then further back from P8 all the way to the rear of the field, minus what was Rice at the time, we have got penalties on pretty much every driver here, and they're all going to have to burn them, as it looks as though I think Bottlejob there went wide out the final corner and may have given himself another slight penalty added on top of it. Yeah, he's added another half-second penalty onto his woes and misery. As they all come up into turn 1 for the 7th time of asking here, you can see that really there's not too much fighting going on right now. I think our drivers have settled down into a rhythm, and now it's really a question of what do they start to do in terms of those strategies. Now if we jump up towards our front driver really, let's take a look at Jack, let's look at his telemetry board. You can see that in terms of his tyre wear at the moment, the left hand side tyres, as would be expected, will be getting the greatest wear here at this circuit, because this is a clockwise circuit, so it's got more right hand turns than it has left hand turns, and there's a lot of rather extended right hand turns here, and that means that the left hand tyres will take a sizable amount to wear through those corners, as Jack picks up another half-second penalty coming out the final corner, just running a little bit beyond the limits there. As we look further back, and there's still no change, but Flapjack has really started to gain on G-Rabbit here, and I think G-Rabbit is finding that that front left on his Ferrari is a bit worn too much. Meanwhile, you can see the difference in tyre wear between G-Rabbit and Flapjack in the fact that Flapjack, after 8 laps, has half the tyre wear of G-Rabbit. Very aggressive on his tyres, G-Rabbit, by comparison, and you have to think the Ferrari driver running behind the pair at the moment is going to have the stronger legs in the course of this first stint. And really, it's, hold on a second, goodness me, and we've got side by side between Sean and Berkey Baby here as they're coming out of 2 and into 3, and Sean now really deploying the strengths of that Megane, which is his overall pace. And I think Berkey Baby here is just trying to hold on, taking a middle of the road line going into 5, but I think he's backed out of it and realised that Sean's going to have the run on him, and it's only going to be pointless fighting as Berkey Baby is right behind Sean as they come into the final corner. And that was a very good move by Sean to move him up into P4, as I think one of our drivers has come into the pits, and that is G-Rabbit from what was at P7 at the time, pitting the first of our drivers to pit, and that is an early pit stop after 8 laps. And you have to wonder whether G-Rabbit is going to switch to, say, the soft or the medium here to try and make it it a longer stint because those supersofts just weren't holding up. And Sean is having to defend furiously against Berkey Baby here. The two drivers making it safely through turn 1 side by side. You rarely see that. It takes a lot of control. Gadget makes a lunge into turn 2 and he just overcooks it a little bit, manages to keep it on track, and he'll be thinking to himself, goodness me, if only I'd broken a little bit earlier and kept it under control. But it has worked in the fact it has stemmed what is Berkey Baby's momentum, and that has caused Berkey Baby to fall back into the defensive position against Flapjack, who's charging but free aside as they're coming up into turn 5. And who's going to hold on? And it looks as though it's Flapjack who's on the inside versus Gadget is on the outside, as the drivers are side by side coming out of 5 and into 6 as Berkey Baby peels off to go into the pits, and Gadget has been able to get through and hold on to P5 for the time being. Very close stuff by our drivers there, as we know now that Berkey Baby has pitted and he'll be looking to use that undercut to get ahead of this group, as there's even more defensive action going on now from Flapjack versus Muller CJ. This has brought Muller into the picture, and Senna is not too far behind, approximately 1.5 seconds behind this pair. And you have to imagine the longer that P6 and P7 fight out on track, as Flapjack adds to his 1.2 second penalty of a half second there. You have to wonder whether Senna's going to try and get into this mix and try and go for a lunge in the near future. Now, that 10-second pit stop, to give you an idea of where it places you, keep in mind Berkey Baby was fighting in amongst this group. Well, Berkey Baby currently is the last of our runners here with a 4.5 second penalty, and he's right towards the back, and he's 22 seconds off of the race leader here. Meanwhile, G-Rabbit's just a little bit ahead of him, and that's the important thing in terms of timing that pit stop, is the fact you need to go for that pit stop at the time where you feel as though you can get the most out of the tyres and not be in traffic. And I think Berkey Baby and G-Rabbit have done a smart move, but of course, if our drivers here in the battle for P4 all settle it down and decide to start working together, then it's going to compromise them, because these drivers will just pull away by using the slipstream of Mr. Sean's car on the straights. Well, they'll all gain a couple of miles of our advantage, and that'll be a couple of attempts per lap effectively if they know how to utilise that slipstream to its utmost. Now, as we can see coming into turn 2 right now, Flapjack going for a little bit of a tighter line on entry, and I think that's just to simply put himself in Gadget's mirrors as if to put Gadget off and try and get Gadget to make another mistake. But you can see how calm Gadget is at this point. He knows he's in a good spot. He's in his target position of that approximate P5, and if he carries on this way with the momentum he's got, he's going to be a contender for being just outside the podium based on the current race pace. As Flapjack goes to the inside once again, looking into turn 5, but you can see he hasn't got that overlay, but Gadget has gone wide there as a result of trying to give the space, but also now the braking, and that's going to be at least a half-second penalty for his troubles as he comes across to complete lap number 11. And meanwhile, Muller CJ is now going to have the run on Gadget as they go up in towards turn 1, because Muller has not had to lift out going into 6 because of the dirty tyres that Gadget's picked up, and that means that Muller is going to take that P5 as they come through turn 1 and into 2. And I think Gadget's going to back it off a little bit at this point and just think to himself, okay, no need to get hot and bothered here. Let's just focus back on the race. That penalty was unnecessary. Let's keep it together. And Senna, meanwhile, creeping his way up into P7 out on track. But remember, behind right now is Berkey Baby and Flapjack. And you can see Berkey Baby and G-Rabbit have already cleared Flapjack. And Flapjack has come right out behind Berkey Baby. And this is the undercut in effect, as G-Rabbit now has benefited the most here. And he's got himself some clear track and no pressure from behind. And it means he can start to run away with that 1.8 second gap. As Plux the Duck comes into the pits from the lead right now, and we have to wonder as he comes in what's going to happen between him and the rest of the drivers. But enough of that right now. Let's focus back again to Berkey Baby and Flapjack, and you can see that Flapjack is not having the best of runs really in terms of staying with Berkey Baby at this point in time, just trying to keep it cool, as Plux is now starting to come out the pits, and Jack is running away a little bit still and going longer on this opening stint, and that will benefit him in the long run if he's going deeper and deeper into stints. But you do have to wonder whether Plux is going to go for some really aggressive outlaps now and simply try to cut back past Jack as they go deeper into this race after the first stint as they come into the second stint. Now, looking further around the field, things have spaced out a little bit so far, but really our closest packs at the moment, as we see Plux the Duck giving himself another penalty after running a little bit over a corner cut there. I think it was either out of turn 1 or turn 2, or even turn 3, I reckon. The fact he only recently updated, but the fact that Plux has increased his penalty at the moment to 2.8 seconds, as Jaganat pits is not going to be ideal in his mind, and Jaganat here could be the one to surprise a couple in the fact that really he's had a very clean race so far, and he's just creeping up as Plux is chasing after it, and Senna comes into the pits as well, and Plux is now going for the move on Gadget into turn 1, and I think Plux has got this done because Gadget will not want to defend this, because Gadget knows he is in a different race right now. But Plux has had to go deep as a result of his tight inside line. He wasn't able to apply it on the apex, and Gadget initially tries to make for the cutback here. I don't think it's going to happen, as Plux is able to outrun him into the braking zone into turn 2, and now Plux is going to be chasing after P3 on track, chasing after Muller CJ. And looking further down the field, we can see that Bottlejob is in the side-by-side moment with Ayrton Senna at the moment. Now, Bottlejob, of course, has more recently pitted, I believe, by comparison with Senna, and Rice is right behind the pair of drivers here. These three really running for the final places on the grid so far, or on the track, I should say, as two drivers are coming into the pits, and it looks as though we have got both Mr. Sean and Muller CJ coming into the pits at this point. Muller CJ being on the soft tyre, that's worth noting there, and he's been able to make that soft tyre go as long as Mr. Sean on the super soft, as Senna cuts very tight to the inside there of what was turn number 5, and you can see he picked up a half-second penalty for that. And meanwhile, up front, it is still Zephyx's Jack with a 15.7 second lead, albeit he's got 1.4 second penalty to serve over the course of the race distance. But Jack really going as long as possible on these super soft tyres, and that front left is absolutely cream crackered. But you have to think that if Jack goes longer and longer here, what you can see, meanwhile, Plux has finally cleared the traffic because of the fact that Sean and Muller have pitted. So right now, what Jack needs to do is realise this, and if he wants to stay ahead of Plux and make sure that gap doesn't tighten up too much, he will need to pit within the next 2 laps, unless he's going for a really long game here and pitting after, say, 15 minutes and turning this race into a free stop. Because every time now that Jack completes another lap, if Plux is able to keep his laps together, he will start closing up on Jack. Now, further down the order, we can see Sean and Berkey side by side here, with Sean in P7 right now, and we're going to see what happened back there because we missed a bit of action. So it looks as though Berkey didn't have the best of runs coming out of turn 4 and up into 5. And I think Sean here just decided to go for it. He used the overspeed of the slipstream, used the fact he's on those fresher tyres, or the fact he's just come out of the pits compared to Berkey, and he's just going late on the brakes, keeping it nice and tight, front engine, front wheel drive, and he's nailed that overtaking manoeuvre before they run down into 6. Good move by Sean, one of the traditional moves that you see at the Red Bull Ring through turn 5 there on the short variation. Now, further up the field, we can see that we've got Gadget and Jaggernaut right now. Gadget, of course, being one of the leading drivers who has yet to pit, much like Jack. He's going for as long as possible, and I think he's going to be pitting within the next lap or 2. And right behind him right now is Jaggernaut, who is on a fresh set of super softs by comparison with Gadget, albeit they've got somewhere. And Gadget here feeling very heavy on the brakes, but still going round another lap. And you do have to wonder here how long Gadget's going to go for as he goes wide out of 6. And now in those worn tyres, Jaggernaut just simply pops through. And riding on board with the French driver right now, you can see in his rear view mirror in the bottom right hand corner of your screen, his rear view TV. He's come up into turn 1. He's going to nail this down into 3rd gear, just bringing it down nice and calmly before 2nd, over the apex of the corner there. A little bit of side to side wiggle there coming through turn 1. That's what caught out Ayrton Senna in qualifying, as you saw it go horrifically wrong. Hold on, further back, we can see that one driver here, Flapjack. Now, what happened there? Did he get it all sorts of wrong coming out the corner? And even further back, we have got absolute chaos going on at the rear of the pack. So let's take a look back at what happened to Bottlejob and the group here coming up into the first corner, as we can see that Jack has pitted. So we tell the story from the perspective of Senna then. As he was coming along the start-finish straight, you can see really getting a good run here. We're going to ride on board with Senna. So coming up into turn 1 and very heavy on the brakes and just clattered into the back of DJ Rice 83. Rice went wide, as did Senna. That was very unfortunate. Oh, goodness me, as we switch away from his on-board here, and Senna's probably thinking to himself at this point, with the heavy damage he may have accrued on the car, that is going to be a bit of a disaster for his race aspirations. But he's still got time to move, as we see Berkey Baby and Muller right now fighting as they go up towards turn 1, and Berkey dropping places to Muller at this point. And I think Berkey really is, after a very strong start and a good qualifying position, he's just not able to pull it together right now. But again, don't rule out the Corvette driver as we go deeper into the race, because that Corvette has got reasonable legs on it, particularly on the straight. Now, the story up front, for those who are wondering, Jack has pitted and he's currently 3.5 seconds ahead of Plux. So the fact that Plux had to clear his way through the traffic of Gadget, for example, has cost Plux quite a bit of time. And Plux will be thinking to himself at this point, as he goes wide out of 5, and that's going to accrue another half-second penalty, is that he needs to find a way of essentially upsetting the car and trying to close that gap down by running in clear air. And further behind, meanwhile, G-Rabbit is now into the pits for his 2nd stop of the race. Now, that is quite a surprise here. G-Rabbit pitting earlier than most as he comes off of the softs, if you will. Now, has he got damage on the car? No, those softs are just heavily worn. G-Rabbit is really wearing his tyres here, and I think that tyre wear's catching him out. As we can see further back, we've got Flapjack defending against Sean coming into turn 1. And Sean not able to get past, as Flapjack is really holding on to that ground there as he's making his way out the field, and Flapjack is on a charge right now. And Gadget, meanwhile, still out there on a set of super softs after 19 laps. How long is Gadget going to go? Surely he's not going for the 20-minute mark to turn this into a 2-stop race. If so, that is incredible from Gadget. And look at the train he's forming behind him as a result. This is absolute masterclass on tyre wear, but all the drivers behind him will be thinking, yeah, it's absolutely great, you can go long on tyres, Gadget, but get out the flipping way. And Flapjack goes to the move late on the right-hand side, on the inside into 5, and I think he's got it done. And Gadget is finally pitting after 19 laps on a set of super softs. 17 minutes clear by Gadget. My goodness. Now that is going to put Gadget in a phenomenal position going late into this race, because it gives him more options now, because if he wants to, he can go absolutely aggressive on the next stint and essentially undercut the rest of the field. And he could be in the fight essentially for P4. Or even, if he gets it right, perhaps if there's some mistakes in battling up front, creep into P3, you never know. But speaking of you never know, what's going on right now is we've got more action behind in the form of Rice, Senna and G-Rabbit all coming through into turn 1 here. And I think Rice has backed out of it, and Senna and G-Rabbit have made their way through, with Senna being the recipient of that P9 right now. And Gadget is right out behind these guys. And let's just check if Gadget took on fuel. Doesn't look as though Gadget's taken on fuel, or if he has, it's a very small amount. Our drivers did say before the race they weren't expecting to take on too much fuel in this one, with there being a total approximate number of laps here of around the region of 55 to 58 laps being completed within the hour. You can imagine that as a result, our drivers, if they're smart with their fuel saving, are not going to have to do a major fuel stop. But Gadget right now has got a lot of work to do to close his way back up by undercutting everyone. But first off, he's got to get past Rice 83, who's on tyres that are much more worn than his own. And Gadget now has to play the long game. Now, meanwhile, up front, that gap between Plux and Jack has increased to 5.6 seconds, although it's varying between the 5.5 and 5.6 second mark. And I think really Plux here has got to push it very hard to try and close out that gap simply through race pace. Jack seems to be in a world of his own right now, but we'll keep our eyes on it. But the thing we want to keep our eye on most and foremost as Flapjack starts to break away is the fact that in P4 right now, Sean, with no penalties on him compared to Flapjack's 2.7 seconds, Sean is the one who's really upsetting the balance in terms of this group of drivers, keeping it nice and clean and consistent as Sean goes defensive into turn 5 against Muller CJ. Muller here trying to make his way past, getting a lot more momentum out of 5, and he's not going to go for the lunge into 6. It'd be very risky to do so. You have to be side by side through there. And meanwhile, further back, we can see that Gadget is now being impeded by Rice 83 as they're coming through turn 5 respectively. And Rice goes wide there, which will give him momentum, but also mean he accrues a half-second penalty potentially as a counter cause. And I think Gadget here is going to have the move up into turn number 1. As he's got the momentum, but will he have the acceleration? I don't think he's got the acceleration with that front engine front wheel drive car having a lot more acceleration than the earlier gear train compared to Gadget's McLaren, but I think he's got the move done on the inside, and as Rice tries to respond, it's not happening. Now, meanwhile, hold on, Muller's in front of Mr. Sean. What on earth happened there? Let's find out. And in fact, our replay camera has broken, ladies and gentlemen, so we won't be finding out. Oh, that's a typical one, but Muller is now up into P5, and I think he may have got that done on Sean coming out of turn 1 and up into 2. No, we've definitely got no more replay cameras. They're gone. Our technical teams are complaining about that. But into the pits, from what was at the time P4, comes Flapjack on 59 litres of fuel on those super softs. And it looks as though Flapjack here is trying to find himself some space out on circuit to effectively get back out and clear air and clear this battle, because it's going to hold him up as Bottle Job also pits from P7 out on circuit. Now, as all of our drivers are coming through to complete lap number 22 and start lap number 23, it's time for us to take a quick water break. What, 20 minutes of the race gone? You can see it's spreading out the field a little bit at the moment, and this is where all the tactics start to come in. Our drivers have to start playing the smart game. But in terms of the smart game right now, G-Rabbit has cleared Flapjack in the war of Ferraris here, and G-Rabbit taking that much earlier start and not taking his second stop yet compared to Flapjack. You can see that Flapjack has positioned himself right in front of Senna, and Senna will probably want to try and get past as soon as possible. And the thing for Senna here, really, he has to make a call. Does he use Flapjack as a yardstick and pull himself along with Flapjack's slipstream, or does he decide to fight here and try and compromise Flapjack's race and pull Flapjack closer to him in terms of the overall race time? If I was in Senna's shoes right now, I'd think to myself, you know what, just ride behind the Ferrari driver. You know he's on a different strategy, you know he's in a different race, and the longer you're behind him, you can see that he's faster. Just use your tyres to the best of their ability, and you'll just gain on the straights. You can see that the gap between himself and Gadget is opening up on these straights because of the fact Gadget does not have slipstream, whereas the 86 driver, Senna, does, as he gets it very squiffy coming out of turn 1 there, using a little bit too much of the entry curve, sends him wide as G-Rabbit goes off onto the grass, braking very late going into turn 2. That is so unfortunate for the Finnish driver there, and he's going to be absolutely kicking himself. We saw he locked up the brakes. I think he broke a bit too late. Perhaps he just forgot his braking point. That means that he's lost a lot of the ground he's made for his overall racecraft so far. That's so unfortunate for the Ferrari driver, but it does mean now that Flapjack has been released up into P7 and will be charging back up into the fight for P5 upwards. As Berkey Baby comes into the pits from P6 on 55 litres of fuel, coming off a set of softs. I think a number of our drivers here are going to be experimenting with the soft strategy of taking the slightly more durable tyre just to get a couple more laps. But really at the moment, if you're in clear air here and you can manage your tyres, it seems to be that the super softs are the way to go. As you can see that Berkey Baby is now gradually coming out of the pits as Flapjack gets a little sideways coming out of turn 1. And Flapjack, meanwhile, has really cleared this pack of cars, and Berkey Baby has got himself a nice little bit of breathing room here. Now he switched on to a set of super softs once again, realising the softs perhaps were not working out for him. And I think Berkey at this point is going to focus on trying to get as close as possible to Gadget's car, because Gadget is Berkey's main rival. And speaking of Gadget, as we ride to the onboard of Gadget, coming on that lovely camera and the lovely dashboard of this McLaren, he's going to go to the inside under braking into 5, and you can see that he's just simply got the better tyres and the better pace at this point. But Senna's going to try and come back at him initially into 6, but you can see Senna backed out of it there because he knew he just would not have the overlap with Gadget's car, and if he'd gone for it there, it would have been a very dangerous lunge for both drivers and could have ended in tatters with heavy damage. And that's the one thing, turn 6, it does offer an overtaking opportunity, but you've got to be so far alongside your opponent into turn 6, and then again, it's such a tight apex if you're on that inside. Do you really want to lose that time when you can simply go for the move into turn 1, or just simply use the slipstream of the guy in front? And Senna being smart there in my opinion, and staying out of the fight, staying out of the awkwardness, going through the corner. Now as they're coming through here, you can see that Gadget is starting to creep away. Again, being on those fresher tyres by comparison with Senna. Senna's front left in particular, heavily worn here as we would expect for a front engine rear wheel drive car. All the pressure being put down on the front tyres, and he hasn't moved his brake balance towards the back to try and balance the tyre well, it would seem. Or at least his driving style would not indicate that. And as a result, Gadget's able to start pulling away very gradually, albeit that Toyota does do well in a slipstream here, and these two I think are going to settle down now and just focus on getting into the race rhythm and running their respective strategies. So after what has been a total of 26 laps for these guys, you have to think right now, okay, how are things going to come together as we start to move towards the second half of the race? Well, the big question will be, how is the top 5 going to play out? Because all the positions up to P5 right now have been heavily contested so far, as Berkey accrues another half-second penalty there. Berkey really being on the receiving end of the track limit penalties here. It's a bit of a disaster for Berkey, if I may be honest, because the fact that all the ground he's making as Plux comes into the pits from P2 out in socket, and Jagannath does the same as well here. Now I'm wondering whether Muller at this point, well, the fact that Muller is running on quite an old set of tyres, but this could actually bring Muller into play for a podium position because he is running very strongly on track, as is right now Mr. Sean. And as we look, we can see that both drivers have got similar fuel and tyre wear, both running the same car and both managing the car very well respectively. You do have to wonder where these two are going to factor out compared to what is Jagannath and Plux. Now you can see that Jagannath has come out behind the pair of them, Plux ahead of the pair of them, and I think Plux will be very pleased by the fact he hasn't been caught into the foray of Muller and Mr. Sean here, as these two really are the ones to watch out for in terms of usurping a podium position in that battle for P3, because Jagannath is not safe, but Plux will probably be thinking to himself that he's just about safe of being pulled into the fight for P3, but he's got to try and find a way of getting into the fight for P1 right now. And further down the field, again, it's still opened up. They've all got all 12 drivers running around on the circuit. Bottle Job currently in P11. A little bit away from everyone right now, with 3.6 seconds between Bottle Job and G Rabbit as Muller CJ comes into the pits, as does Mr. Sean. So that's quite coincidental pit stop time in there between the two of them. So I think they're both sort of matching strategies and running a similar strategy to one another. And perhaps they think they're in a similar race to one another and are going to try and work together to get themselves closer and closer to that P3. But Jagannath will be pleased, of course, because now he's got that clear air ahead of him. But he'll also be probably thinking in his rear view mirrors, what about those two Megane drivers? Are they getting too close to me as we go over the race? And currently running the last of our drivers out on the circuit, we have got DJ Rice 83. Well, he was last before the pit stops, and Senna's going to be coming out of the pits very shortly, and I think Senna's just going to rejoin in front of Rice. It's going to be close as they come up into turn number 2, and I think Senna's going to have the inside line into 2, and he's just going to be about safe as they come under braking. Albeit I say that, is Rice going to go all the way around? Oh no, Rice has had to back out, but he's gone very wide through the corner there, and he's backed out of it as a result, simply because Senna was on that inside. I think that was the right thing to do by Rice, because contesting it there would have been disastrous for both men. As they come for it, and Berkey going wide again, the real focus now needs to be on the fact that we have got Gadget in the midst of Mr. Sean and Muller CJ. Now, this is not ideal for Mr. Sean, as Sean immediately going on the offensive as they start lap 30, going to the inside of Gadget, coming up to the braking zone for turn 1. And I think Sean's going to be thinking to himself here, I cannot afford to let CJ get away from me, Muller, because Sean knows, and I think he is pacing himself to Muller throughout this race, because he knows that Muller in front of him is in similar machinery. They saw back at Sardinia that they were both very very similar on pace. As you can see just how tight Sean is taking turn 2 there, and he's going to be careful to keep 2 wheels on the inside. He's just on the inside of the track limits there, but Sean right now driving defensively from Gadget initially. I think he's worried that Gadget's going to try and come back with the rotation of that McLaren through turns 2 and 3, but Gadget is now falling away a little bit here, as would perhaps be expected, given the fact that his tyres are much older by comparison with Sean's. Although, oh, hold on a second, who's gone very wide there? We have seen Berkey Bay go wide again, and he's even accrued even more of a penalty. And Berkey just not having a good time right now, and falling away really from competing in the battle for P5 and starting to move further and further back the field. But looking further up again, coming back to this discussion about Gadget, I think with Gadget right now, he's got to be thinking to himself that he is in a race for P5, albeit he's on that different strategy from Sean and Muller, and he can't afford to lose too much time. He needs to run as close as he can to these two, because they are going to run away initially, but of course the offset of strategies here, it may be the case that Gadget starts to leap them as we get closer towards the end of the race. Now up front, meanwhile, let's not forget about our race leader at this point in time. Currently 20 seconds ahead with a 1.8 second penalty to take over the rest of the race distance. It is Jack. He's been running a very quiet race, and we saw that his opening stint was an absolutely ferocious number of laps. Not as many as Gadget, we should point out, but it was approximately 15 to 16 laps on a set of super softs. In fact, I don't think Jack has pitted so far. No, Jack has definitely pitted. He's got to have pitted because of the fact that super soft tyre has gained a bit of life, otherwise that front left in particular. But Plux right now just has not got a response, it would seem, to Jack. But then again, because Plux is running more stops by comparison, you have to imagine that Plux is thinking differently and he's going for the multi-stop, whereas Jack is going for a couple of simple stops. But right now, in terms of action out on track, Flapjack is trying to hold on to what is P4 against Muller CJ. Now, of course, Flapjack, as we look back from Flapjack's car, looking on the telemetry, you can see that Flapjack is in a different strategy right now from Muller CJ, and he's weaving a little bit to try and break a bit of the early toe, coming out of 4 and up into 5 under braking. And Muller, you can see how much he's closing under braking with the stronger front engine front wheel drivetrain through the corners of his Renault Megane versus the mid engine rear wheel drive drivetrain of Flapjack's Ferrari. And what this means is, as they go deeper and deeper into this stint, as tyre wear starts to come in, you're going to see that front end of Muller's car essentially start to understeer more, because the tyres are not going to be able to deploy as much grip. But Muller is getting closer and closer as we continue to ride back, and you can see Muller just using a bit more width of turn 1's entry, and I think Flapjack has just kept it in there, and I think a move's going to be on very shortly, and Flapjack's just increased his penalty slightly. He has the 3.8 seconds as Muller is now coming into turn 2 and trying to get the cut back initially, but Flapjack planting the car very nicely through the corner on apex in turn 2, and I don't think it's going to be long before Muller's just going to have the run up into turn 5, or alternatively up into turn 1, because you can see that Muller is getting closer and closer as we've got a driver coming out the pits, but we'll worry about that in a second. It is Flapjack who's holding on right now, and I don't think Muller's got the move. So looking further back, coming out the pits right now, I think it was G-Rabbit coming out of the pit stop, but switching back to the battle for P4, Flapjack is into the pits. So Flapjack has done enough before coming in the pit, so he will have held Muller up a little bit, and Muller will be a little bit aggrieved by that, of course, because he wouldn't have wanted to be fighting. But I think Flapjack will be pleased with himself. He positioned it well, so he didn't lose too much time in battling with Muller, but he's given himself a nice pit stop window, and I think he's going to be coming out in the space between Berkey and Gadget effectively, and that means he'll be in clear air for his next stint, which will work out very nicely, what with Gadget being on a different set. As Jack now comes into the pits for what is his second stop at this point in the race, with 33 litres of fuel left, and you have to wonder whether Jack's going to take on a little bit of fuel here. He seems to be pitting every 15 minutes, or he's going to go a little bit longer and then go for one final stop and run it to the end. But Jack right now really holding on to a nice positional advantage out on track, and you can see that whilst he's dropped to P2 in the timing boards right now, in terms of our competing driver for the race lead, that is Plux the Duck. As the gap is all said and done, Plux is now coming through turn 1 at this point, and the gap between the pair of them, as Plux goes very aggressive through turn 1, is in the region of 4 seconds. So Plux is trying to bring that gap down by driving as rapidly as possible, but Jack really is in the driving seat right now, if you'll excuse the pun, where he's just simply holding on to that race lead, and he can determine the pace and flow of this race, albeit being on that different strategy. As we can see, another driver has come through the start-finish line. I thought there was a driver coming into the pits there. My apologies. There was a little bit of a glitch. But what you can see is Berkey picking up another half-second penalty, now up to 7.5 seconds. In fact, there was a driver in the pits. I was right. It was Sir Bottlejob in the pits, coming in from what was at the time, I think, P11. And he's going to be coming out in P11 once again as he comes. Well, he'll be coming out in P10 actually as he comes through. So he was in P10 at that point. No, he's in P11 at the moment, correction there. He's coming out of the pits right now to continue his race. I think for Sir Bottlejob right now, it's all about simply trying to bring the car home and see if he can pick up some places through drivers making mistakes. And he is in the race with G-Rabbit, that should be pointed out. So he will be in that battle for P10 as we look further afield right now and see coming through turn 1 that Meanwhile, our last runner at the moment, DJ Rice 83, is getting well out of the way of our race leaders and our championship contenders right now, and just simply running in that P12. Not in the best of races, Rice, and I think he will just want to bring the car home at this point. But that's no disrespect to him or discredit to him, we should say. All of our drivers here have earned their place in Tier 1 on merit, but of course at the end of the season some drivers will have to be relegated, and nobody wants to be that driver in particular, or that group of drivers. And as Flapjack's coming through here, currently in P8 after his pit stop, you can see he is closing up on Berkey Baby right now and Gadget. And not a rapid pace, but he's gradually gaining on the pair of them. And I think here for Flapjack, it is a big question of how many stops he wants to make now, because he knows that with half the race complete, he has to manage his tyres accordingly and simply get the most out of them. So will he want to pit early, pit late, as he goes on to his final stint? Who knows? But as you can see, he's getting closer and closer to Berkey Baby, with the gap now being down to slipstream range of that 8 tenths and closing. And we know that Berkey Baby seems to be struggling, and Flapjack is already flashing his lights as if to give Berkey the message effectively to let him through. And I think Berkey is going to do so as Berkey taps him behind there. And really Berkey not fighting it. I think Berkey realises that Flapjack is going to get through one way or the other, and there's just no point at the end of the day fighting it. Instead, stay behind the faster driver and see if you can use him as a pace car. Looking further through the field, we've got Gadget as the next target on Flapjack's list, and I think Gadget here is going to be thinking to himself, right, well, given that Flapjack's made it past Berkey so rapidly, do I want to do the same, or do I want to fight this one, given that I'm in a battle with Sean, Muller, CJ and Jagannat for that potential P3 if I can keep it together? And Gadget will want to creep away from Berkey even more and not be pulled further down the field in terms of the fighting position. So Gadget's got a lot to think about here as Flapjack is getting closer and closer. That gap now down to 1.3 seconds as they come out the final corner to commence lap number 38. And these are our closest drivers out on track right now, we should point out, as they're coming through to start lap number 38. But you can see just how much time Flapjack is taking out of Gadget. When it's not on the straight, it's through the corners in particular where the Ferrari is stronger. And Flapjack really showing who's boss in the handling at the moment by comparison with the McLaren. That's faster on those straights, definitely, with its extended gear range of 7 gears. Well, both cars have got 7 gears, we should point out. But it's got the better acceleration by comparison with the two. And Flapjack is just gaining and gaining through the corners. And he's almost in that slipstream range. You can see he's got close enough already as we look forward from Flapjack's perspective right now. Going to the onboard, lovely camera this for the onboard of the Ferrari, lovely dashboard there, and I don't think Flapjack's going to be worried about that as he's getting closer and closer to his competitor here. Almost going a bit wide there out of 5, but you can see he's in that dirty air zone now, and it is causing him to understeer more through the corners, but he's very close and gaining, and already Gadget is now starting to weave off the line a little bit as Berkey comes into the pits to do another pit stop, and that's going to reset Berkey much further down the field by comparison with these two as they come up into turn 1 again, and Gadget going wide there out of the corner, and I think it means that Flapjack is going to have the run here up into turn 2. Make it a rare mistake from Gadget, we should point out, so far in the race. Gadget has been one of the most consistent drivers out of all of our drivers here, and Flapjack is now up into P6. But it's worked out for Gadget as well when you think about it, and that Gadget hasn't had to fight because he's just naturally let Flapjack through a mistake. Now further around the field, we have got, I think Berkey Baby has come out into a bit of a disadvantageous position in that he's come out behind G-Rabbit and Senna, who are chasing after one another, and Berkey is right up the rear end of G-Rabbit right now, and that's not worked out ideally for him. He was perhaps hoping he would have come out in front of these two, and now he's got work to do to get past the pair of them if they decide to go a bit longer and not pit in the near future. Looking around further still to the rest of our drivers, we've got Bottlejob also chasing after this pack right now, albeit Bottlejob is on a different set of strategy, if you will, and you can see that his tyres are in a different state by comparison, and Rice is quite a bit further back, but up front right now it is Jack who's leading the way through, and Pluck's dropping to 7 seconds back, having just passed DJ Rice 83 through the blue flag scenario. And I think Rice here just chasing after him and trying to use Plucks as a little bit of a slipstream pull as they come onto the start finish straight to complete a lap and begin the next one. And Muller here running in P4 right now and closing very gradually on Jagannat here. Now looking at the tyre wear of the two cars, you can see that Muller is due for another pit stop soon. I think he's going to be pitting with 20 minutes to go. Meanwhile Jagannat really starting to feel that tyre wear on that front left. I think Jagannat here is going to be falling into the clutches of what will be a three-way fight for that P3 position right now between himself and the two McGann drivers as he gets it a very odd line coming through turn 1 there. You could see that the car just did not want to turn through the corner, and that is that front left tyre just refusing to rotate. Meanwhile, further down the field here, we've got 3 drivers very close proximity to one another in the form of Senna, Rabbit and Berkey Baby as they're all coming through to complete another lap and start lap 41. As we take a sip of water, you have to wonder who is going to be on the attack shortly. I think it's going to be Berkey Baby here with his pace on those pressure tyres. And And you can see Berkey Baby really building up a lot of momentum, and it would be expected because of how fresh his tyres are. Remember, the longer he's in this battle and the longer he's in that dirty air, as we've got some drivers coming into the pits, and we'll announce who those are shortly, it's going to be costing Berkey Baby a lot of time as we switch to the onboard here. And as he rides behind, he's not getting the best of runs, but he's doing some early upshifts. I think he's going to fuel save here because he doesn't think he's got the ability to get alongside G-Rabbit as he's coming up into turn 5. And you can see that G-Rabbit, meanwhile, is closing on centre and Lomming Rate, and both drivers are into the pits, both of them taking the evasive action there, as we can see that Sean and Muller have both pitted as well, and it seems though those two drivers are definitely working together in terms of matching one another's pace, and they are definitely in the fight with the Frenchman here, because now Jaganat's got to respond. Surely within the next lap or two, Jaganat has to pit, otherwise he is going to be falling into the clutches of the battle here. But speaking of a battle, look who's come up into P4 on track, and that is Flapjack, and whilst Flapjack is on some tyres that are quite old, you have to imagine if he holds up Muller and Mr. Sean here and they all start fighting against one another as Jaganat goes around for another lap. Goodness me, Jaganat trying to go as long as possible to get to probably that 20-minute remaining mark. What it will mean, and you can see actually that Gadget is ahead of Sean right now. Sean has come out behind Gadget. This has not worked out for Sean in particular, but neither of the Mangan drivers, as they are really caught up in a four-way fight for what is P4 out on track, but really is the battle for P3 over the whole course of the race distance now. Now, who is going to win this as it comes down to 22 minutes remaining? It's hard to tell, but I think right now, if you're in Jaganat's shoes, you have to respond to this, because the longer you stay out right now, the more likely you're going to fall into the middle of this group, and that means you're definitely in the battle for P3 at the end rather than out the front of it and dictating the pace of the battle. And that's what Jaganat's got to be aware of, as Sean is really not able to get the momentum down at the moment against Gadget. Gadget holding on to that P6 for the time being, but Sean's probably thinking right now, come on Gadget, just get out the way, you're on old tyres, get out my way. And Sean going to the inside into turn 5, and he's going to get the move done, I think, although it looks as though the door was almost shut there by Gadget. Gadget perhaps not anticipating that Sean was on his inside. I think Gadget as a result has backed out of it there to respect the fact that Sean did come through like a raging bull in a china shop, and Sean is now chasing after Muller CJ, but the gap has opened up between them to 4 seconds, and that is such a disadvantage to Sean. And we'll talk about disadvantages. Gadget's coming back and he's backed out of it immediately. I think he's realised that Sean's going to defend to the inside, there's no point going for this, but Muller meanwhile, the one who's on a charge after Flapjack, he's going to the outside initially for turn 2. Now, will he try the cut back out too? No, he won't. But he's positioned himself very well for 3 to get the launch into 4 and then up into 5. And I think this is where Muller is going to get a very strong run. As you can see, he's in the slipstream and he's got a brilliant run. And Flapjack immediately going defensive into 5. He knows that Muller's going to be very strong under braking here and has got a lot of momentum. He's going to try and cut all that momentum as Flapjack comes through the corner there, sliding through turn 5 and holding on to the position for the time being. But really, as we can also see behind, that Sean has got past Gadget. Now, was there any damage between the two drivers? It doesn't look as though there was. I think Gadget's just simply got it wrong somewhere and fallen away, because Sean has cleared Gadget now. As Muller, we look further forward again, and Flapjack is holding on to that P4, and Muller is trying everything in the book to get past, but Flapjack is having none of it, and this is working out for the Frenchman ahead of them so much. Jaganat needed this so badly, because if he's just got to take a tyre change at the moment, he's got the 8-second window to do so, and every lap these two fight right now, he's being given more and more of a window to hold on to that P3, and this is vital for the Frenchman in coming home in P3. As we look further back right now, and we can see in the battle for P8, well actually it's not a battle right now, it's just simply Berkey Baby being lapped, but he has got Bottle Job chasing after him. But enough of that for the time being. Looking forward again, we can see that Flapjack is now into the pits, and that finally releases Muller. I think there's going to be some private obscenities from Muller here, because he knows Flapjack has cost him a huge amount of time as they're coming towards the final stints of this race, and it will be so vital for Flapjack that he's given that opportunity. Now looking even further down the field here, we can see that Plux has lapped G-Rabbit at this point. That's why they're so close out to the circuit. Thought there might have been a bit of a battle there, and we've got Berkey Baby being lapped by Jack at this point, as Flapjack is going to come out of the pits very shortly. Now, where is this going to put him? It's going to put him in what is effectively P6 out on circuit, but when is Jaganat going to pit? That is the big question, and I think what Jaganat is trying to do here is go so long as to not need to stop again, because look at that front left tyre, ladies and gentlemen. There's nothing left of it, and he's going one more lap. Goodness me, Jaganat, just give that tyre a break, put a new one on, for crying out loud, man. As Plux is in the pits as well, and really I don't think Jaganat's in the battle for P2 right now with Plux. I think this is just a customary stop. As you can see, Rice is flashing Jaganat, and I think Rice is backing out of it. I think Rice is going to be a little bit annoyed here, because essentially the car that's just lapped him is slower than him coming out of the corners onto the straights. But Jaganat right now coming out And turn 1 will be able to sniff the rear end of Plux, but he's not going to be able to battle with him here. And Jaggernaut is in a different world right now in terms of battling, and Plux is chasing after Lee. As Gadget has just come into the pits from what was at the time P7 out on circuit ahead of Berkey Baby. But remember that Gadget is going to be the first driver here after after Flapjack. So those two right now will need to absolutely nail it as if it's the ultimate qualifying session, because they will need to do the perfect laps, give themselves the clear air and just run with it. And this is not good for Gadget already, because what you can see is that Senna is close beside him right now, coming up into turn 2, but I don't think Senna's going to have the run here, and that's worked out. And meanwhile, Jaggernaut is still going. Goodness gracious me, he's going to have to pit soon, as that is costing him time surely right now, as Muller is only 5.3 seconds. Jaggernaut has lost a huge amount of time, and Muller is on much fresher tyres. Now, whether there's going to be another stop for the two Megane drivers, you do have to wonder, but what this will do is it will trap the Megane drivers into a scenario whereby if Jaggernaut is able to get a good pit stop in and come out in clear air, he will be able to run qualifying laps to the finish, and these two will start to feel that tyre wear in the final 5 minutes, and at that point it's when Jaggernaut could strike. But it means that Jaggernaut is going to have a huge amount of work to do, and of course, depending on how it all plays out, I mean, right now to Flapjack it is approximately in the region of 20 seconds the gap between Flapjack and Jaggernaut. But if Jaggernaut has to take on even a small amount of fuel, that means Flapjack is going to close out as Jaggernaut comes into the pits with 1 litre of fuel remaining. Now, how will it play out? That is the big question here in the battle for P3. We're going to just take a look back, and we can see that Gadget is still running ahead of Senna. Senna's not being able to get past, he's simply running the slipstream. But Jaggernaut in the pits right now as Muller comes through to complete lap 48 and move on to 49, as is Mr. Short. Jaggernaut is still in the pits. Now, what about our P5 driver at the moment, Flapjack? Where is he going to come out in relation to Flapjack? The Frenchman's coming round out of the pit exit right now, and I think he's going to come out in front of Flapjack, but it's going to be close. Flapjack is going to have a huge amount of momentum coming out of turn 1 and up into 2, but I think Jaggernaut has just about done it. He's come out approximately 1.2 seconds ahead of Flapjack, but goodness me, what a way to leave it in terms of when to pit. And Flapjack at this point is probably thinking, right, I need to stay as close as possible to that Frenchman and chase that Dodge around the circuit, because I know if either of those Megane drivers has to pit, the pair of us will be taking that position and then we can fight. And that must be in Flapjack's mind right now, and Jaggernaut must be thinking to himself, right, I've got to nail every lap as if it's the lap of my life. And sometimes you've got to do that, ladies and gentlemen, and for this driver, the Dodge driver, it is the time. He is going to have to go for it if he wants that P3. And Muller right now just simply running out there in a comfortable space, 4 seconds ahead of Mr. Sean, and just putting in lap after lap, consistent laps. But you can see that tyre wear is starting to take a little bit of a stranglehold on the front left tyre in particular. We'd expect it, of course. And Mr. Sean, meanwhile, on a little bit more tyre wear, running the traction control. That will put additional tyre wear into the car, a small amount, but it builds up over the course of laps. But these two right now are the drivers to watch out for in terms of when they next pit, if they decide to pit. And the gap between Sean and Jaggernaut, if you're wondering and want to keep monitoring it, is 11 seconds right now, and it is very, very gradually closing. We don't expect it to close right now, but what you can imagine is as the laps go on, it will close down, and at that point, that's when the Dodge driver is going to have to pounce. And looking further back here, you can see that actually Gadget seems to have got it all sorts of wrong somewhere, because he's actually dropped back into P9. Now, was there an incident or something along those lines between the two, or did Gadget just get it wrong? We won't be able to wind back and see that on camera, but you can see that Gadget has dropped back by comparison, being on those fresher tyres and having fuel in the car compared to Senna. And this is not ideal for Gadget, as our race leader, Jack from Team Zephyx, now pits for what is his final stop of the day. And meanwhile, in terms of positions right now, you can see that Plux the Duck, 25 seconds down at this point in time. I think Jack here has done all he needs to do to stay out in front, and Plux, whilst his tyres are relatively fresh, it's going to be a case that Plux would have to pull off the absolutely meteoric run of laps in order to close up. His Jack is now coming out of the pits, and Plux, I think, unless he can surprise us all, is going to be bringing this home in P2 without any mistakes. I think the battle for the race win has been settled, but we will of course keep an eye on that in case there's anything unexpected. But meanwhile, in the battle for P3, Muller CJ right now pulling out more of a lead over Mr. Sean, 5.1 seconds the gap right now. And it is continuing to open up. And Senna, meanwhile, is pulling away from Gadget. Now, Gadget seems to be struggling at this point, or he's just not having the best of laps, because Senna being back in front of him, that's compromising Gadget to a degree. And really, Senna right now is controlling the pace of Gadget's race, and this is putting Gadget further and further out of the contention for the battle for P5 or P3, as Gadget picks up a half-second penalty out of the final corner. Looking further down the field, of course, we can see that we do have Sir Bottlejob running in P11 at the moment, and not really close to G-Rabbit. And in terms of pit stops, Bottlejob may have one more pit stop scheduled in, given that his tyres are starting to show sizable amounts of wear. and we'll keep an eye out for that. And then we've got DJ Rice at the back of the field at the moment, still ongoing, still pushing around and potentially in the chase for P11 against Bottle Job. But again, his tyres, whether they make it to the end or not, it will be questionable, depends on his driving style and what his strategic plan is. But really, the man on the charge at the moment is the man behind him, another Megane driver, and that is Muller CJ. And Muller is just putting lap after lap. Now, to give you an update on the gap between Muller and Jaganat, it's currently standing at 6.2 from Mr. Sean, and add on to that 8.9 seconds. So that gap is now in the region of what is approximately 15 seconds or so. And really, that is the gap of a pit stop and a little bit of fuel. I think for Muller and Sean, they've both got sufficient fuel to get them to the end. It's just simply, well, I say that, looking at Muller's fuel tank right now, we're not 100% sure on that. I think Muller may have to take on a little bit of fuel in the pits, so it's going to be very close between the two of them. Now, looking further around the field, we do have one of our drivers coming out of the pits. Actually, no, my apologies, it's not out of the pits. It is Jack simply lapping G-Rabbit at this point. And we look further ahead, and we can see that Gadget right now is chasing after Senna here, and Senna a little bit sideways going into free, not getting the cleanest of lines and seemingly drifting his Toyota through the corner. I mean, we know it's born after the A86, the legendary drifting Toyota, but the GT86, whilst it's a bit of a drifter as well, not in that drifting configuration, I must say. But Senna keeping it under control here and really pacing Gadget right now and holding on to that P8 out on circuit. But of course, Senna is likely to have to make another pit stop, and really it's going to be a case of how long Senna wants to hold Gadget up, as he's coming to the end and he's very low on fuel by comparison with Gadget, who's got ample fuel and tyre life to make it to the end of the race. And G-Rabbit is coming to the pits from P10, releasing Bottle Job up the field, of course, as Gadget is still trying to get past the Toyota driver, not knowing, of course, at this point, but perhaps suspecting that Senna's going to have to pit very shortly. As we've got another driver into the pits, and that is Muller CJ from P3. Now, this is the important stop. Let's not worry about Sean right now, as Sean he's coming to the pits as well. So this is important for the Frenchman. Now, will Jaganat be able to surpass both of them as they come out the pits, or will he be right in the middle of the fight? We're going to stay with Jaganat right now. The fuel's still going into both Mr. Sean and Muller CJ's cars. The tyres are on, but we're hearing that the fuel's still being put in. And Muller has gone up to 25 litres of fuel. So Muller is coming to the pit exit right now. He's just going through the kink to start his run down to turn 2. Jaganat, meanwhile, is coming out. Look to your left-hand side. Will we see an overlap here? It'll be on the right-hand side actually now, and you can see it is very close, but Muller has been able to come out in front of Jaganat, and now Jaganat has got to go for it. But look behind the group, and you can see that in P6 right now is Sean. It has not worked out for Sean so far, and Sean has got to go on a holy crusade of runs in his Megane in order to beat the 3 drivers here. So it's going to be a 4-way fight for P3 in the final 11 minutes remaining. And any one of these guys could win it. I think Gadget is out of contention for this because he's just too far back, as he's been released by Senna right now, but he's 13.3 seconds away from Sean at this point, and he's got Jack coming through to lap, and he's going to have to give up the track position shortly in order to let the race leader come through, of course. And looking further down the field, we can see that Bottle Job at the moment is ahead of Berkey Baby. Now, Bottle Job will most likely have another stop to do, and he's got Plux the Duck coming through. We'll have to let our second place driver come through shortly because of the blue flags. And I think for Sir Bottle Job, he's in a fight right now with potentially Senna here, albeit Senna's not too far behind this group, so it could be a fight with G-Rabbit actually. So we will come back to that. But for now, let's focus on what's happening in the battle for P3, because this is important. And what you can see immediately is that because he's on fresher tyres, Muller CJ, and it'll also be the same case for Sean, that gap through the corners is really opening up. It's only on the straights where the Dodge Viper has got the parity with the Renault Megane, particularly on the longest straights. That's the start-finish straight. You'll see that Dodge Viper starts to close up because it's got the stronger top-end speed. But so long as the gearing stays within 2nd to 4th gear, that Renault Megane is going to be the stronger of the two initially. But remember, once that tyre wear starts to come in, and it'll come in faster on the front-engine front-wheel drive Megane, that's where it loses out as Flapjack goes for a pit stop here. Now, this is a bit of a surprise here. We weren't expecting a pit stop, but he seems to be putting on a fresh set of super softs. Now, this is a very odd time to call a stop, simply because unless he's underfueled the car, and he knows he has, he's taken himself out of the battle for P3 in my opinion. And I think he's underfueled the car because he's putting fuel in the car, and I think he's realised it. So that means we are now down to, unless there is a surprise pit stop, and he went, hold on a second, what's gone up here? I mean, we've got a driver who's staying, okay, it's Rice, he's staying out the way of the battle for P3. I was going to say, there's a driver off, but that means now Flapjack, unless any of our 3 drivers here have to go for an unexpected fuel stop, I think Flapjack is out of contention for battling for P3 and may have to settle for P6. But never say never, of course. We'll have to wait and find out, but that's what the timing screens would indicate right now. But of course, drivers have got to serve penalties as well, and if Flapjack can avoid picking up any more penalties, and the guys ahead of him continue to pick up penalties and start fighting with one another, then you never know what could happen. But Gadget right now is the one who's going to be on a charge, because he knows that Flapjack has just pitted, albeit Flapjack's going to be on fresh tyres in his Ferrari, but he could potentially be looking at a P6 if he gets it right and he chases after Flapjack and gets close enough to make the pass. Now looking further down the field, of course, we've got Berkey Baby here, quite a way down on Gadget and 3.5 seconds ahead of Ayrton Senna. Senna right now holding on to that P9 in the Toyota and not really getting that much closer to Berkey Baby at this point. And then in the last of our top 10, it's G-Rabbit at the moment. Ran a bit of a quiet race, and in the fight against Bottle Job, where Rice, meanwhile, is just simply right at the back of the field. Unfortunate for Rice, not having the greatest of days, but still here with us. And Bottle Job, who we skipped over there, in the Porsche Cayman, of course, running in P11. And now that he's done his final pit stop, I think he's going to try and put in some fast laps to chase after the Finn in the Ferrari, and we'll keep our eyes on that. But up front, let's not forget about our race leaders at the moment. We have got Zefix's Jack. He's running in first place with 10.1 seconds over Plux the Duck, currently in P2. And really looking at the fastest lap right now, it'd be a good time to take a look at our fastest lap data. We can see that Jack has set the fastest lap with a 51.7, 1/10 faster than Plux's own 51.8. Just Jack showing us that McLaren's just got a little bit more life and overall pace in it than the NSX today. But I think Plux here, given the fact that he has got the lead in the championship right now, will be accepting that P2, albeit not happy with the fact he's not going to win here. It will close the gap between himself and Jack, and in fact I think Plux is going to have to make another fuel stop soon if he's not careful. Or perhaps he's going to try and run the fuel down, go for a pit stop, and then go for literally an ultimate qualifying lap to get those fastest lap points. 2 points for the fastest lap. I think this is Jack's race to lose, really. And now it just comes down to who wants it more. And hold on a second. Whilst we've been looking at that, what has happened here? It looks like Jaggernaut is getting closer and closer to the back of Muller CJ. That gap is coming down and down and down, albeit it's now 3.8 seconds. Sorry about that, folks. I thought we had the two drivers very close to one another on track. But speaking of close on track, we can see that Sean has closed up to Jaggernaut. And in fact, that gap has closed down to 1.8 seconds now. It was much greater earlier on. And what that means is now Jaggernaut's going to be looking more towards his rearward mirrors. And I think Muller has pulled a blinder here. And if Sean can get through as well, the pair of them will be very accomplished as Plux comes into the pits from P2, and I think that's just simply to put a tiny bit more fuel in the car and go for the ultimate qualifying lap to try and essentially take away Jack's his fastest lap and those 2 extra points. I think Plux will want every point he can get out of this race, knowing the fact that Jack is going to get closer and closer to the championship with the 50 points available for the race win. But Sean coming through right now, and you can see Sean is just ripping shreds of time out of Jaggernaut. He's just taking a whole, almost a second out of Jaggernaut on a single lap, and Sean is on a charge right now. And I think within the next 2 to 3 laps, he is going to be going for the potential attack here, and Jaggernaut's going to be looking back and back and back as we ride on board with Sean as he comes out of turn 1 and into 2. And you can see very collected as Jack is also pitting here, and I think Jack is responding to Plux. I think he's guessing that Plux is going for the fastest lap, and he's pitted as well as both security in order to get a fresher set of tyres in the car and make sure he's got ample fuel, but also if he sees that Plux sets the fastest lap, then he'll go for the fastest lap. I think those two are playing mind games with one another, and you can see that Sean has just got such a more concentrated line, attacking line coming out of the corners, particularly turn 4 up into 5. And Jaggernaut is going wide of apex there, and the tyres on Jaggernaut's car just destroyed, and Jaggernaut is into the pits. He's coming into the pits right at this critical juncture, and for Jaggernaut that's a disaster, because he was running in a position where he could have potentially tried to hold Sean up, but I think he's predicted the inevitable and thought to himself, right, really I'm in the race against Flapjack right now, and unless the 2 McGann drivers have got to pit, now let's look at their tyres here. I think they both pulled an excellent run strategy here, because surely Muller has not got to pit unless he's underfueled it and we just don't know it. And then looking back to Sean's car again, they have proven they can go the distance on those tyres. I think really Muller and Sean are the 2 guys who are going to really surprise everyone here and come home in P3 and P4. And that is an utter surprise there, with Jaggernaut right now back in P5, and the gap between himself and Flapjack as we see them come through turn 2 and 3 is approximately 4.3 seconds. I don't think Flapjack's going to close this up unless Jaggernaut makes a major mistake at this point. And looking further down the field here, we can see that Gadget is 3 seconds down with Flapjack gradually closing, but it's a long gap back. And Berkey Baby right now being chased very furiously by Senna here. Senna on a charge here in the final 5 minutes as we switch over to his onboard perspective. And he's building up the pace here, but that tyre wear, and if we look at Berkey Baby's car and we look back from Berkey's car, we can see that Berkey has got the better tyre life in him so far. But again, Berkey has been prone to picking up penalties, and perhaps Senna's thinking to himself, you know what, if Berkey makes a couple more penalties, I'll just simply grab P8 by simply running close enough to him, and he has to take those penalties at the end of the race. It's going to be all to play for, but you can see that the legs on that Corvette coming out of turn 6 onto the start-finish straight to complete the lap and begin another one. It's more than enough to open up 3 temps alone, and that is something which Senna's going to have to find a counter to elsewhere on the lap because he just simply hasn't got an answer coming out the final corner. But then coming into turn 1, you can note how the fact he initially gains on braking, but again, Berkey's just simply got the better acceleration out the corner. But it's going to be through turns 2 and 3 where the Toyota driver by comparison will close up because he has got the better handling. In fact, a lot of handling there as he takes a huge chunk out of the apex grass through turn 2 and into 3. But again, you can do that in the 86 and feel comfortable doing so, although it will cost you a little bit of time running on the grass for a brief period. But Senna really trying to match Berkey right now and get into that slipstream zone. But Berkey responding and setting equivalent lap times, albeit utilising the strengths of his Corvette to do so. As we do have another driver in the pits now. Who is that pitting? That is Rice pitting from last place at the moment. And I think he's going to just be sitting out the rest of this race distance. I think he's just going to take a breather at this point. I think the team might decide to put some tyres on towards the ends for one final hurrah. I think Rice has just decided he can't get another place because of how far back he is. But to be fair, if that's what Rice has decided to do, we'll still give him the thumbs up. And I think he deserves a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, because he's made it to the 57-minute mark. And he has stayed in the race all the way through it. And that's the spirit about. Sometimes you don't have a good day. It's about staying to the end. That's what it's all about. But our driver at the moment, who really is on the charge with only 2.5 minutes to go, is Jack, charging around in P1 right now, and he has improved his fastest lap to a 51.6. He's responding to Plux's aspirations to go for that fastest lap, and I think Jack is going to be on course to pick up the ultimate point tally today of the pole position lap of 2 points. 2 points for the fastest lap and then 50 points for the race win. 54 points in total, and Plux is not going to be too pleased about that in his championship aspirations for winning in Season 6. Meanwhile, looking further back, we can see that Flapjack has not been able to close up to Jaganat. So I think Jaganat is now going to hold on to that P5. But Sean and Muller, meanwhile, they're not getting close to one another. In fact, Muller is continuing to pull away from Sean. And the question is, will there be an unexpected pit stop from the pair of them? I'll be honest with you, folks. If there's a pit stop here, I'll give you the money myself in terms of the betting odds, simply because I do not expect either Muller or Sean to pit at this point. It would be completely against run of order for them to do so. Looking back to Gadget, you can see that he's about to be lapped by Jack. He was getting closer and closer in your shot earlier on. And I think Gadget here knows that he won't be closing up to Flapjack at this point. He's got to settle for that P7 as he gets well out the way almost. I think he had a bit of a bad run through turn 5 and he's going to get out the way now of Jack as Jack comes through. He does indeed, gives way on those blue flags. Meanwhile, further back, we can see that Berkey has still been in fact, Berkey has gone very wide out of turn 5 and Senna is just going to take the position. Now, will Berkey have the comeback coming out of 6? As I think Senna's had to overbrake the car to avoid running wide and picking up a penalty. And you can see that he hasn't picked up a penalty, but Berkey has got a very strong run here as we look forward from his car into the corner into turn 1, but Berkey lifting off to take his penalty here and drifting through turn 1. Now, looking at the tyres, I don't think Berkey's got the tyre life left to get to the end at this point. And further back on the pair of them, we can see that if you look in the rear of your picture, we have got G-Rabbit. He's letting Plux the duck for us. Sorry, I thought G-Rabbit was in a battle with, say, Bottle Job there, as Rice is still the pits. And Bottle Job still chasing after G-Rabbit, a long way back, and just been lapped by Muller CJ with just under a minute to go. So all of our drivers coming through then to start completing their final laps, if you will. I think the first driver to complete their race distance, if we don't see any more action on track, and I think Senna's just getting away from Berkey at this point in time, it will be what will at this point be not Bottle Job. Well, Rice, I think, has confirmed his finishing position in P12, so congratulations to Rice, of course. In terms of looking around the circuit right now, 20 seconds to go. Nobody's really closing up at this point, and the close cars on track are lapped cars running close to the cars on the leading lap. So I think your first driver to finish their race after 67 laps will be the Frenchman coming home in P5, and that is Jaganat. Probably kicking himself for not bringing home a podium today, but still pleased to bring home the P5. A difficult race for Jaganat, but he still pulled off a good result here. And a top 5 finish is consistent with his form this season so far. Just behind him, Flapjack, again, probably ruined the fact he didn't have the right strategy for the day as he burns off his penalty, but still coming home in P6. And then Gadget coming home in P7. As Zephyx's Jack comes home with the race win. Congratulations to Jack. And then next up will be, well, it looks as though it's a Senna. He's just going to lead Berkey Baby across the line here as they're coming up to complete the lap. And Senna's just held off Berkey Baby for P8. Berkey finishing in P9, of course. Then it's going to be Plux up, burning off a penalty as G-Rabbit comes home in P10. And Plux is burning off his penalty. He's going to finish in P2. Second place for Plux. And then burning off his penalty here is Muller CJ. But hold on a second. Who's that behind him now? I think that's Bottle Job. Yeah, that's Bottle Job. And finishing at 4th is Mr. Sean. The two McGann drivers putting off a blinder in terms of strategy today. Those are your final results, ladies and gentlemen. And congratulations to our race winner, Zephyx's Jack. But to give you a rehash of those final standings, we're just going to bring those up on screen for you. You can see that the race win, pole position and the fastest lap all went to Zephyx Jack. Fastest lap, that 51.6. And as we just bring up our statistics screen on our computer here, what this means is in terms of the championship right now, that with this being the final of the first 6 races before we start to drop potential races over the course of the season, that means that the gap right now on the best of 6, well, given that Jack has only raced 5 races, he's going to close up the gap massively to Plux the Duck in the championship, although Plux has only done 5 races as well. But after the 6th race, if you will, that 54 points compared to Plux's 40 means the gap between the 2 drivers now has closed to 2 points in the championship. So it's going to be now biting. And of course, there is the question mark over Plux, where he's going to be doing the final 2 races of the season versus Jack, who may be doing the final 2 races of the season. So there's big question marks over some of our drivers here in that battle for the championship. But we'll have to wait and see. But it's been a phenomenal set of runs. Been a crazy race. Goodness me.
And with that, that's all we've got time for today. If you have enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and or subscribe to both my channel and also the official Drivers Room YouTube channel, as may be found in the description of this video. But until next time, I've been your host TX141 or Britain a Spit, and remember to stay safe, stay well, stay smiling, but most importantly, stay on track.